So, dear friends, of course these teachings contain a lot of wisdom for us, and there's something I didn't tell the children, that they have the seed of Buddha nature, as well as the seed of you, the parents, and maybe they just need a good environment for this Buddha nature to be able to manifest. And it's a very natural process. Plum Village is a good environment for Buddha nature seed to come up. Yeah. Our nature as a human being also has things that don't look so much like Buddha nature. We get quite complicated, and we can experience a lot of suffering in our life that we can create, and also, that happens because of the nature of the sort of struggle to survive and misunderstandings in relationship, all sorts of reasons for different kinds of suffering. And our children, although they can be very fresh, they also can suffer deeply too. And we have to help them to suffer less and to know how to handle their suffering. But we cannot teach our children how to handle their suffering unless we know how to handle our suffering. Yeah. So there's many things that we can provide for our children: food and a place to live, and we offer them love. Yeah? And then there is also the need to give them ways to take care of emotions, for instance. And I'm not sure so many of us adults were taught how to take care of our emotions at school. But I know that's one of the things that we share about here. And this is a school as well, Plum Village. So one of the things we saw is that the seed of corn gets planted into the earth. And in Zen Buddhism, there is an expression, that you cannot grow a lotus on marble. A marble looks very nice, very shiny, but you can't grow a lotus on a marble. In Buddhism, the lotus plant, you see the lotus pond outside, the beautiful white lotuses? They are symbolic of purity and enlightenment sometimes. So they represent something very beautiful in us, and they are an outer sort of symbol of this beauty. But they cannot grow on marble, on stone. They need the mud. Their roots are in the mud. So there is a teaching that I will give today about the interbeing of happiness and suffering, using the example of the mud and the lotus. So I meant to bring lots of color pens, but I forgot. So we have I don't know if I'm very good at drawing lotuses. That's my lotus. And a lotus has a stem which connects it. And the lotus is emerging from the water. There's some lotus leaves. Let's see if I can get this to look roughly like a lotus leaf there. Okay. Okay. So here is our lotus growing from the mud. And when we go and look at the lotus pond and we see the lotuses, we don't necessarily see the mud, right? We see lots of beautiful green leaves and we see the beautiful white lotuses. But we know, when we look deeply and when we think about it, that the mud is there. And when we think about it, we know that the mud is essential for the growth of the lotus. But it might not be obvious to us. We might not think about it unless we think deeply beyond what we see on the surface. So the same often is true with ourselves when we reflect on our happiness. We don't see the connection between our suffering and the happiness. It's not obvious to us. We just want lotuses. We don't want the mud. Right? You prefer to do away with the suffering and just have the happiness. There may be, I wanted to invite you to offer me, happiness is one kind of lotus. Actually, we could list a few more. What would be a beautiful flower for you in your life? Something like a beautiful quality that you would like to have. Happiness may be one. Calm. So you want to have the quality of calm. So I'm listing types of lotuses. Yeah. We have all different kinds. Joy, yeah. Harmony. Fun goes with joy. Trust, okay. Kindness, yeah. Compassion, I heard. I'll give that a nice high place here. Health and, yeah, health. So we have love. Understanding, right. Gratitude.
Deep listening. Peace.
Okay. Peace. Peace. Patience. Okay. Somebody said ethical. So how would that be? I'm trying to think how that. Ethical. I'll put your ethical. Integrity would work with that. Okay. Yeah, I think integrity is a good word. Solidity, stability. Okay. Yeah. Solidity, generosity. Clarity.
Mindfulness.
Yeah. It's like a superhero. Mindfulness. Okay. Confidence, yeah. Kind of goes with trust. Freedom and equanimity. Okay.
Honesty.
Honesty.
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Wisdom. That would go with understanding, I think.
Friendship, brotherhood, sisterhood.
Yes. Thank you. Friendship. Brotherhood. So we know all about these beautiful qualities. Huh? And interestingly, we can group some of them. So friendship, brotherhood. A lot of them come into for instance, trust and confidence, freedom and equanimity, kindness, joy, compassion. They come under the teaching about true love. Can I just put true love here? Forgiveness maybe also comes with letting go, which is equanimity, also with compassion. Diligence, yeah. So there's so many lotuses that we know about, and to some degree we have experienced them. Otherwise we wouldn't say them so enthusiastically. Like if you had no experience of joy, you probably wouldn't shout it out. Yeah. If you had no experience of what it is to be generous, or didn't know what integrity was and the value of integrity, it wouldn't come to your mind. So, but we see that we know all about this, and that these are all things that we see are beautiful, and they're all interlinked. They all somehow connected with each other. For instance, we know that if we're calm, if we're able to be calm, we can be more patient, and we can be more kind, We can find more understanding. It's very clear that they're all speaking about something that is universal for all of us and beautiful, something good. And these could all be considered lotuses. So we did get the teaching from Sister Downyim on true love and the four immeasurable minds. Do you remember those? And they were loving kindness, which is sometimes Thai likes to express as friendship and brotherhood and sisterhood. Compassion, joy, equanimity and freedom. And Thai also added trust and confidence. And one more, Thai added reverence and respect. We often talk in schools about having respect for the teacher or having respect for each other. And people say, oh, well, you didn't earn my respect or something like that. But in this sense, respect comes from a deep connection, reverence for life. When we climb to a mountain and we're feeling really in connection with nature, and we see the beautiful, delicate alpine flowers, and we're just like, wow, and then we maybe see an amazing bird, and we get this feeling of awe and wonder, and we think, nature is amazing. And then if we know the practice, we come back to ourselves and our body, and we breathe, and we touch life in us as well as the life around us. And we see that we are also a wonder of nature, and we're also beautiful. And we're in touch with a sense of reverence for life, not as a concept, but as an experience, a living reality. And then the respect for life comes naturally. Yeah? But we also know that we don't always experience all of these all the time. And I'm now going to ask you to list something down here. Types of mud. Okay. So we know what we're talking about here. This is also universal, right? Sadness. Okay. Fear. Selfishness. Okay. Ignorance, I keep hearing. Jealousy. Frustration. Hatred. It's not even nice to say the words, is it? Yeah. Discrimination. Loss. Grief. Huh? Would that be grief? Okay. Loss and grief. Envy, and we had jealousy. Will that cover that one? Craving. A few more, huh? Struggle. Okay, so frustration, struggle. Okay. Sorry?
Betrayal.
Oh, wow. But you see, there's an interesting one, like with betrayal and selfish. There's something extra going on. It's kind of a judgment that somebody did something to you. So, I don't want to, but yes, it's interesting. Betrayal, we experience that as a... Alienation. Feeling isolated, alienated. With that also, I'll mention loneliness, because many people do suffer with loneliness. Anxiety. Violence. Okay. So somebody said ego. So a lot of, sorry? Greed and craving. Okay. Right. Do we have enough for now? Okay. So there's plenty of mud in our life. Do we all know, everything that's listed, has anybody not experienced one of them? No hands up. Maybe the translation wasn't good enough. No, I think it's true. I think we've all experienced all of them. Just as we've all experienced all the good ones, all the lotuses, we've all experienced these really unpleasant ones, right? And we want to, we'd rather have done with them. But they keep coming up in our life. And even we are practitioners and we know about Buddha nature and we know about cultivating compassion, we still find ourselves dealing with these. If we look at the wisdom of the teaching of the mud and lotus, we maybe not need to discriminate against our discrimination. We don't need to discriminate against our suffering. We can see that in the case of the nature teaches us that the very fabric of the lotus the very substance of the plant, the stem, the leaves, the beautiful, pure white petals, they contain elements of the mud. The elements of the mud have been brought up and they've become part of the very structure and fabric of the plant. So it's not an abstract thing. The mud and the lotus truly inter-are. There is an interbeing between the mud and the lotus. You cannot have one without the other. When it comes to talking about happiness and suffering, we simply don't want to believe that. But it's also true. You cannot have all of these lotuses without this kind of mud. Turning into a mindfulness bell. Yeah. So sometimes, how can we do this work? How can we make use of this suffering and turn it into a lotus? We learned, you see, there's a number of things to say here. One is that actually our suffering is not enough to turn it to become a lotus. We need more than suffering. And by the way, we don't need any more suffering than we already have. We have plenty, thank you, we have plenty of mud. We don't need more wars. We don't need more of any of this kind of, there's plenty for us to make many lotuses. So please don't think that we're talking about creating more suffering in order to have, we've got plenty. We're not going to run out anytime soon. So we want, but how to make use of it, that is the point. How to make use of this suffering. And the truth is that we need more than the suffering. We actually need the lotuses to make use of it. We need wisdom and understanding. Now, as I said in the teaching for the children, all of the wisdom of thousands of generations, the wisdom of life is just contained in a little seed. And the wisdom of the Buddha is also in seed form in us. Buddha nature like a seed in us. But what are the conditions that help that grow? So the wisdom is there in the form of a seed. And just like with the plant of corn, the seed of corn, we have to be in a good environment, an environment that is conducive to growth. Okay. When a lotus seed is planted in the mud, it says some signals come along and say, this is a good place. I'm in this squelchy, and it allows itself to be open to receive the water coming in, and the process of growth starts to take place. It's a bit similar with us. Sometimes we have a lot of suffering that we keep, and we've got a lot of wisdom too, but somehow we get stuck, and we don't grow so well. But when we're in the right conditions, the suffering gets to come up, and we get to experience healing. And that can happen, for instance, in Plum Village. Just with a very gentle, peaceful environment, we may have experienced in our Dharma discussions, sitting in a circle, when the compassion and the concentration is there, people are listening to us. We feel the safety to bring our suffering, and we get the healing, because it's actually a natural process, just as growing the lotus from the mud. So we need, the other conditions that we need are, we need the wisdom, which is somehow natural in us, in the seed form. But it helps if we have maybe some extra teachings, like about the practice of mindful breathing. So here's our mindfulness superhero coming to the rescue. When we have mindful breathing, we can take care of our suffering right there. And so we're going to come back, of course, to the practice, but just on this list, we also need a good environment. And that environment could be a community, could be a family, it could be a school. A school may be a really good environment for a child. It may also be a difficult environment. We need a good environment, could be a community, could be a spiritual community. In the Buddhism we talk about a sangha. A community of people that come together, like us actually, to practice together with that intention, that shared intention. It's an intentional community. And within this, we're talking about having spiritual friends. So, friends and love. And we know that true love can actually be concretely talked about in many ways, in terms of compassion and trust, patience. So the lotus plant, the lotus flower to grow, it needs the suffering, and it also needs the environment, it needs the water, it needs the air, it needs the sunshine. And these could be connected to when we're talking about making use of our suffering, we need the practice, we need we need an environment. Okay? So the teaching is easily understood. I could even have offered this to the children, right? It's not so complicated. Yeah. But when we get down to actually doing it, it's maybe another thing. Because we have a tendency to want to run away from our suffering. The nature of suffering, it feels uncomfortable. And the last thing that we think of doing is turning towards it until we come across the teaching. But even when we come across the teaching, we say to ourselves, that's a really good idea. And yet those of us, many of us, have made use of the teaching, and we've had the courage. Maybe we realized we had no choice. We realized I know that unless I take care of this, it's only going to get worse. When we get to that point, we may say, okay, so I have to turn towards, I have to embrace this suffering. I know that that's the way, and I trust that. And when we make an experience, we get more trust, more confidence that actually it does work. So I remember sometimes an example for me was, I have, in little ways, I see that through the day and through my life in Sangha, I do both. I avoid suffering, and I also am able to take care of suffering. And the degree to which I turn towards and embrace my suffering, the more happiness. It's a simple equation. There was one time after a meeting with the brothers, there was an issue that came up that made me upset. There's usually some issue that makes me upset in a meeting. Somehow it stirs something up in me, and I'm not very happy. And then there was a small group of brothers, two other brothers, that we spoke after the meeting, and I said, this issue that we brought up, and the brother said the exact thing that I didn't want to hear. And as a practitioner, with other practitioners, I was able to say to him, "Dear brother, some anger is coming up in me. It's I need to go and take care of that. I'll see you later." Yeah. That was the best I could do. I could have said something a bit more beautiful, like maybe didn't necessarily need to tell him that, and I know that that might not be the best strategy for you in your workplace, for instance. But the point is, I was able to at least not go into a kind of conflict, and I was able to take myself out of the situation. And I was taking responsibility for my anger, because a lot of our suffering is unnecessary, and it comes from not owning the feeling, but putting it on to somebody else, not taking responsibility for it. So I took responsibility. I thought, okay, this is my anger. I go and take care of it. And I went and I sat on my bed, perched on my bed, and I breathed. And what I did was, this is a recommendation for turning mud into a lotus, as opposed to generating more suffering. What I did was, I didn't listen to the story or think about the story. In fact, as I share with you today, there's no way I could remember what it was, the story. But that was what was really important at the time. I can't remember what the subject was, what was said about it. I just have no memory. But I do remember that I felt angry. And I remember that taking care of that anger was, I'm really glad that I made that experience. I sat, because I could have done some other things. I could have had a fight with the brother, verbally, of course. And anyway, he was bigger than me, so. Or I could have gone to another brother and found another brother and had a really good discussion about the situation and explain why I am so right and he is so wrong. Yeah. And I would get to justify myself, and yeah. But this particular time, I'm not saying I don't sometimes do that, but this particular time, I sat and I breathed, and I didn't focus on the story, and I just took care of the emotion of anger. The energy of anger was something I felt right in my body. It was and it actually was very evident that I could locate it in my body. It was sort of around here, and it was heat. Yeah. And then it started to move up to the chest area as I paid attention. So, turning towards my suffering with the mindful breathing, recognizing what is happening in my body, and then using the teaching about smiling to my anger with compassion. So bringing compassion to my anger. So the first is what I did. And as I breathed, and I was not listening to the story, but just breathing with the energy. And the other key thing is I wasn't trying to change the anger. I wasn't thinking, okay, I breathe with you, and then you get to go away. I was rather saying, I'm here for you. You have a right to be here. You're here as a guest, and I accept you. I accept that you're here. And I allow you to manifest your energy and be in my body. But I'm not going to feed the story. So just being with the energy of the anger and with bringing mindful breathing to kind of circulate and aerate, somehow it sort of infusing the anger with my mindful breathing in the sense of taking care, embracing the energy. And just after a few minutes like that, I noticed the heat, and the heat of the energy was cooler, everything was cooler, and I started to feel, actually, instead of feeling uncomfortable, I felt very pleasant. And I was starting to enjoy just being with myself and being with this anger, which had somehow changed a bit and no longer had the same quality to it, but it was still there. And then at a certain point, as I continued, I kind of got bored. Yeah, it's like, oh, the anger's gone, now what? Well, I could just enjoy my breathing a bit more, you know. So basically the whole thing, the anger rose up, it was there, I took care of it, it went down, just as it says in the books. But this time I actually did it. So when we do it, we make the experience, we get the confidence and the trust in the practice. And as well as that, we get a certain understanding, a certain clarity, and we're able to go to the person as I did. Because I went straight out of the room and I met the brother in the corridor, and I immediately spoke to him about the situation. And I explained to him my point of view, but this time not from anger, but just from clarity of what I wanted to say, and just feeling very calm and not angry with him from having another point of view, you know. So there was a lot of there was some lotuses that came from that experience, and I remember those. I don't remember what the story was. Notice that. Have the sound of the bell. So when we make this kind of experience, and when we understand this connection, the interbeing of happiness and suffering, we can actually talk about something called the goodness of suffering. The goodness of suffering. It's not so instinctual, but when we when we make the experience, we can turn it into a habit, that we turn to our suffering and we don't put an extra tag on our suffering saying this is bad. But instead we say, hang on a sec, although this feels uncomfortable, maybe I've made the experience, I can make use of this to make a lotus. And just that thought alone can help us not do the automatic running away, avoiding. It can help us go to our suffering and take care. There's many different ways to practice to help with our suffering. There's some ways that lead to unnecessary suffering, and there's some ways that help. What I just described is one way that helps, and I sometimes encapsulate it with the acronym RAIN. So basically what I described as doing with my anger was I recognized I'm angry, and I communicated that, and I took responsibility. So because it goes with R, I'm going to add and responsibility. Responsibility. Okay? So we taking responsibility. So I recognize this is my anger. And then the next thing is when I sat on the bed, and however we do it, we accept. We fully accept our anger. So this is A is for accepting. And the action of accepting has also this sense of embracing. So I'm going to put embracing as connected with accepting. Like a mother embraces a child, a crying baby, we embrace our anger like that. And we can smile to our anger with the loving smile of a mother to her baby. If that image helps give you a quality of the practice. The I is for investigating. Getting curious. Now, as I described my experience, I didn't get curious about the story, but I got curious about the nature of anger as an energy in me. I sort of said, how am I experiencing this? And this sort of quality of curiosity is quite useful because it gives you a certain distance from the situation. I'm curious, what is this anger? What is this feeling in my body? Where is it in my body? How am I experiencing it? Can I let it be more manifest? Is that? And I felt it flushing in my skin, for instance. And you start to observe what is happening. But you're not frightened of it because curiosity has this element of non-fear. Yeah, you're not frightened of it or being bullied by it, but I'm curious, what are you going to do now? You know, and you've got this container with the mindful breathing. So investigating. We sometimes call this looking deeply. It's the other aspect of going deeply into what is the nature of your suffering. But again, maybe not so much in terms of analyzing it. One way we can create unnecessary suffering is to overthink our suffering, is to analyze it to death. You know, we become more expert on our suffering than our therapist, or you know, we know everything about our suffering. There's nothing we can be told. We know all the roots from, you know, the way that something our father said, and the past life of Some people talk about past lives, or we may have lots of stories about our suffering. But this looking into the nature of our suffering is not so much this analyzing, but again it comes back to this aspect of accepting and being with and being curious and just allowing and discovering, allowing a process of discovery to take place. So when we do like that, we can learn a lot from our suffering. And we may indeed learn something about something we did in childhood, something that happened in childhood. But it's sort of revealed to us, And it is a useful thing to sometimes go back and connect with the inner child in us, befriend the inner child, and ask the child, how are you? I haven't been with you for a while, And we may need to find where that child is. It may be locked in the bathroom in our old home. And in our meditation, we go back and we find our child. But again, it's not analyzing, it's a journey of discovering, of looking deeply, of investigating in that sense, of discovering where is our child and what does it need? What does our child need inside us? Maybe it needs to come out and play. And we take our child with us on a walk, in the walking meditation in Plum Village. You're invited to do that, by the way. You can all bring your 8-year-old, your 5-year-old child with you. The last one I've already sort of talked about is non-identifying. Non-identification. So it's taking a step away and not making it personal. So one of the things that we can do to create unnecessary suffering is to really make it personal. He did that to me. And one of the things we discovered in the question and answer yesterday was how Tai Phap Jung, he answered the child, remember, about the question and saying, it was saying, that this child says mean things to me. So the first thing that Tai Phap Jung was able to show the child is, well, sometimes you do mean things too, right? So it's not just one side. Oh yes, so I also do mean things. So when we feel really hurt by somebody, we can also recognize that, well, we also do the same. And recognizing that there was many causes and conditions behind why somebody did something to us that has nothing to do with us. So we depersonalize, we take away the sense of it's all about me. So recognizing that even if we don't know what they are, we know that there's always causes and conditions that bring about certain behavior. Whether that behavior is violent, selfish, greedy, at the root of it all, we find there's always causes and conditions that explain to us that if we knew enough about the causes and conditions, we would finally say, yeah, of course you were going to do that. You had no choice, in a way, because of all those causes and conditions. But because we got the practice, we have a choice. We have a choice not to react on all our causes and conditions that would normally mean that we fight back or we say something back. And we have a choice to put some space, maybe with 3 mindful breaths, and instead of reacting, we respond to the situation with spaciousness, compassion. And that is a choice that we can take. So a lot of our suffering comes when we put ourselves in the story, and for instance, when we have an emotion, we just say, one of the things that can really help with non-identification is going back to this first one, recognizing. Sometimes we use the expression mere recognition. We merely recognize, you just say, this is anger. We don't have to add something to it. This is my jealousy. We don't have to say, I'm jealous, therefore I'm just an idiotic, childish person that hasn't got, how many years have I been practicing and I'm still experiencing jealousy? Oh, I might as well just give up. Go somewhere else. So that's the story, that's what we're adding to the jealousy. But if we just have the mere recognition, oh, this is jealousy, then it becomes something we can get curious about. We can accept it, and we can just say, that's it, that's what it is. And we don't identify with it as saying, we don't even have to say, this is me, I am a jealous person. We just say, jealousy has arisen through causes and conditions. Just like the greed and the selfishness the betrayal, somebody used the word betrayal, of the other person, has arisen through causes and conditions. And when we doing like that, we get a lot of space to be more understanding and more compassionate. So we get the lotuses of compassion and understanding. And then we may, in fact, be in a position to help the other person too. To help the other person. Because we're no longer caught in the mess. We're no longer down here, we're up here. Right? We can offer some light on the situation. So, another useful way we can handle our suffering is when we recognize we've got a certain mind state of suffering going on. We can change the peg. We use it in Buddhism. We say change the peg. It's in modern terms it would be change the MP3. We used to say change the CD, but nobody has CDs anymore, right? So you have to. But like you've got some music playing in your mind, and it's your story, right? And it's your mind state, and it's depressed, or it's it's the usual story you're telling yourself about yourself, or some sort of feeling, and you can bring. You can change the whole situation by simply choosing to change the MP3, to change the music that's playing. And that is, for example, let me think of an example. Supposing you're feeling isolated. If somebody used in down here, we had feeling isolated, feeling alienated. So what would be an antidote to feeling isolated and feeling alienated? Oh, I'm feeling isolated, I'm feeling alienated. But we could choose to put ourselves in with people and be vulnerable, taking a step with some courage and saying, I'd like to be, in this group, or go for a walk with you guys, or, in the Dharma discussion family, we get to be part of a group where we feel we're included, we're in a circle. And we can touch the seed of not feeling isolated. And if we're feeling isolated in that situation, we recognize, this is my seed of feeling isolated. but you can be more curious about it, because you actually recognize as well that actually I'm in a loving environment, and you question why do I need to be feeling like this? So joining in, like with the washing up with your family or cleaning toilets, joining in can be an antidote to feeling isolated. Getting involved in service is a beautiful way to come out of that feeling of feeling isolated. With social anxiety, I think, again, going back to the Dharma groups, the Dharma discussion circles, people share sometimes, they bow in and they say, I am experiencing social anxiety. And they basically name what is happening for them to the group, and somehow magically that changes things, because they're doing the exact opposite of what their social anxiety would tell them to do, which is to stay, I'm not saying anything. I'm just going to sit here. Nobody's forcing me to. But instead, they make themselves vulnerable, they bow in, and they say, I'm touching social anxiety in me. I've heard that many times, and I always find it very beautiful that somebody would do that. So it's kind of changing the peg, or you could say having an antidote, allowing it. But it does require this, allowing yourself to be vulnerable. So, in terms of the practice, the way of taking care of suffering is not to suppress. If we suppress our suffering, eventually we'll get sick. And I've experienced that even as a monk, that if I suppress my anger or my difficult feelings, I can make myself sick, because I'm trying to keep the smile, be a good monk, and so but I didn't give myself the time to take care of my emotions. So suppression is not the best way. It's not a good way. It's a temporary measure. We all do it to some degree, but we pay for it. We know we pay for it. And other people pay for it as well, eventually. But then, so the opposite would be to express our suffering. Like in the case of if I say I'm angry to this monk, I've kind of expressed it, but then if I go into the conflict and really get angry, it's like I get hold of the mud of my anger and I throw it in his face. And I say, you make a lotus out of that. We want them, you do the work. I'm angry. Why should I do the work? Why should I breathe? You caused this anyway, And then we actually feel like that, deal with this anger, please. There's another expression our teacher, Tai, used like to offer somebody your anger, as if it's a lotus flower. It's like offering somebody a raw potato. So, will you eat this, please? It's very delicious. It's a raw potato. But if I cook the potato with my mindfulness, with my practice, my concentration, with my compassion, and then I the Dao the potato. The the Dutch people love cooked potatoes. I was going to say, thank you, very delicious. Yeah. So it's not that anger is bad, it's that we need to, it's one of those kinds of fruits that we need to cook it first, yeah, before we offer it. And we also cook it with the wisdom of non-discrimination and the understanding of interbeing. So, taking refuge in the Sangha is a practice that can help us take care of our suffering, and it's something that it's like the Sangha, the community here, is like a boat, and it can contain many stones. Whereas if you put a stone on a surface of a pond, it will just drop straight to the bottom. But if you put it in a boat, you can put many stones and the stones do not sink. And it's like that for us when we're here in this environment. There's a lot of capacity to embrace, and we're like a boat that can contain a lot. And there's enough joy, and there's enough of all of the lotuses so that we're not out of balance. So we have room for both the mud and the lotus, and in the image of the boat, we stay afloat. We're okay. So in a group, you can have some suffering come up, and the collective energy is there for you, and it's okay. Yeah. So that's another good way to take care of your suffering. When somebody mentioned loss and grief, sometimes the goodness of suffering is that we recognize, but sometimes it feels like we recognize too late how much we appreciated the other person and what the other person was bringing to our life. Every summer we have something called the rose ceremony, which is to bring attention to our relationship to our parents, our mother and father, and to recognize how blessed we are to have our mother and father still alive. And even if they're not alive, to honor our connection and to feel connected to them. So even if they have passed away, we can very well continue to connect with them and to have a conversation with them and to notice that they are in us. They continue in us. Their qualities and all of their wisdom, like the seed of corn going into the plant. And there was a dear friend who is also a Dharma teacher, shared with a group of us recently that he lost his mother, and he experienced it like, he used the image of a canopy of trees, and like suddenly part of the canopy of the trees is gone with the loss of the mother in the family. And that's a real sense of loss. Yeah. But as a practitioner, he is also brought to that image, so therefore I feel now it's also my role to grow as a tree and also fill that gap left, that canopy. So with that way of looking, it's not it's noticing, it's not suppressing, it's recognizing there has been a loss here, but there's also this sense of new growth and continuation and responsibility. And that's a very useful, beautiful way to consider. And so sometimes our suffering can bring us good things. It can help us to appreciate things. It can bring us more compassion. Many of us have been contemplating the 5 mindfulness trainings, and many people say, I'm fine with alcohol, I just have a little bit every now and then, and that's completely understandable, you know. Why wouldn't you, if you do not have a problem with alcohol, drinking 1 glass of wine twice a week, say, then why stop? Why would you stop? And for me, because I've experienced alcoholism in my family, when I came across the 5 trainings and I came across the teaching about not drinking any alcohol, actually at first I thought, but I don't have a problem personally with alcohol. But when I understood that the depth of the teaching was not just about me, and many people do have a major issue with alcohol, and they cannot just have 1 drink and be okay, and it causes so much suffering. And the suffering had been so real for me in my own experience that I immediately got it and saw that not drinking was a way to heal my family, to offer something back. And so it touched in me the seed of compassion and determination and clarity, and it became very easy to not drink. So that was, and it's because of a kind of suffering. You know, that suffering had actually sown a seed of clarity in me and determination. It was just ready to, as soon as I touched the teaching, I thought, that's it. And it was just very clear from that point on, very easy to practice. So sometimes our suffering is waiting for just 1 extra ingredient, and it becomes a great source of strength in our life, whereas before we just thought of it as a terrible suffering. So the teaching can maybe unlock the goodness of suffering for us if we know how to bring the wisdom and the teaching to it in the right way. And touching suffering in other people can touch our compassion. So we know in many ways how this teaching is very true. I'd like to end with a song. I wasn't sure if I was going to do this, but it connects to the teaching of the corn and the plant, and it's too good not to do it. And it touches also on this losing a way to help us when we've lost somebody, maybe our mother or our father, and also see our interbeing with our mother, our father, our teachers, our friends, and all living beings in the here and the now, in the present moment, seeing that it speaks to that wisdom. And it's based on a Thai's teaching and a Gatha, and it was put to music by Thai Pháp Lin, who at this moment is supporting his family with a loss of a member of the family, a tragic death in the family. So we offer this song for his family and for also all of us that maybe can use this wisdom to help us with maybe our grief or our loss, or just to look deeply and appreciate what we have in the present moment. If I had a guitar, no, it's okay. So the verse you can join in. I mean, the chorus you can join in with me, and I'll sing there's 4 verses. So the chorus goes, unborn and indestructible, unborn and indestructible, beyond time and space, beyond time and space. Unborn and indestructible, unborn and indestructible, beyond time and space, beyond time and space. So many of you know the song. This body and these feelings were transmitted to me by my mother and my father, by my teachers, my friends, and all living beings, unborn and indestructible, unborn and indestructible, beyond time and space, beyond time and space. And that which is transmitted is not less than the transmitter, and I who receive the transmission, what am I but that which was transmitted to me? Unborn and indestructible, unborn and indestructible, beyond time and space, beyond time and space. This body is not me, these perceptions are not me, and I am not limited by this body. I am life without boundaries. I have always been free, unborn and indestructible, unborn and indestructible, beyond time and space, beyond time and space. I am my mother, I am my father, I am my teachers, my friends. I am one and yet I am many, I am all, I am none, no beginning, no end, unborn and indestructible, unborn and indestructible, beyond time and space, beyond time and space.